Madam President,
Yes.
I'd like to have ordinance 11-15 be given its first reading.
Madam President, I second that, please.
Ordinance 11-15, an ordinance of the Common Council of the City of Anderson, Indiana, establishing multiple county infrastructure authority. Now, Rob Sparks.
Rob Sparks, would you please come forward?
Good evening, Council. Tonight I'm here on the behalf of and representing the Mounds Lake project and the introduction of this ordinance and the agreement that is coupled with that. We're, without a doubt, I appreciate the time collectively, the people have come out as well as the council itself. This is kind of the bedrock of what our society is about as we bring, this is a very large project with polarizing points, but we come together and collectively try to cast a vision and direction to go forward. So no matter the outcome, I believe that we've succeeded by...
Excuse me, would you, can you guys hear it? No, I didn't think you was because I couldn't hear him.
Is that any better? It's still a little low.
How about the auditorium?
Can't hear over there either.
Can't hear? How about the forest?
Can the auditorium hear me at this point?
Nothing coming through over there.
At all?
Okay.
They just heard me a minute ago.
Hello?
Keep testing.
Hello, hello, hello.
Over there, it was all right a while ago when the lady come in early. And now we can't hear one word you're saying over here. Not one
We
word.
won't get started until you can.
Okay.
We'll make sure you can.
Can the auditorium hear me at this point?
They're not looking.
I'm just listening for a...
Yes or no?
Yes, they can.
gave a
Yes, they
thumbs
can.
up.
Yes, they can.
The auditorium shaking their head yes. Okay? All right. Again, I thank you for your time to come together. I believe this is a great experience, and certainly I have my own agenda of trying to advance the project, but no matter the outcome, I think we are all winners by coming together and try to collectively cast a vision and direction for our community. This project is large in scope. It's about a $440 million projected cost. I believe that under community leadership, it is the best way to advance this project, which is why we're introducing the ordinance to form a commission to move forward. I believe that a project that impacts as many people as this does need to be under the guidance of the elected officials to direct that path, which is the reason we've proposed the agreement. And this process will play out in incremental steps over a period of months and years, not days and weeks. Today is not to talk about building it. It is about the philosophy of directing the project to see if we can clear the hurdles necessary to advance this project. And I certainly appreciate the feedback. We have got our tech team here tonight from the DLZ engineering group that will speak here in a few minutes, as well as I'm sure you're going to get a lot of feedback from the audience, and there's a lot of difference. We'll be around to ask follow-up questions if you choose to do so, or however you want to handle that as a follow-up meeting. I think the project in general is about a 2,100 acre lake, just to recap, from or somewhere around C Street or so in Anderson, out through and up into Mount Pleasant Township in Delaware County. It's a pool that we're proposing that would just not draw a line and build, but there would be a lot of work done in relation to creating a reservoir or a lake that's going to be functional, knowing that it's going to be a water resource. So it has the ability to raise and lower and still be functional. And this is a deep well basin, and you'll hear some of those points as this plays out. And it gives us a unique opportunity to advance this project. Some of the recreational aspects of this will be trails and connectivity with the Greenway in Muncie, as well as possibly going as far west into the Indy area as well to make some connectivity with our parks. And certainly boating, fishing, all types of sports associated with that, with the lake, would be expected to be able to be utilized. From an economic standpoint, we believe that it's going to be a potential to kind of rebuild and start to move our economy toward a new direction by attracting new dollars and new investment in our community. That plays out over a generation's time. That isn't going to be something you see in 2 years or 5 years, but it starts to build a base to advance the community. I think that it gives us an opportunity to clean up some additional current previous use sites that are currently in the area that could be environmentally would give us an opportunity to clean those sites and provide a better future for our kids and our grandkids as well. And this project will have that ability. It provides the ability to do some drought preparedness for the center part of the state for water supply, as well as flood protection for the immediate downstream area. And some of those issues about how far down will be dictated by in the Phase 3 study as we kind of model a little bit more along those lines. We've looked at the idea of adding solar and hydro in Phase 2, and we would continue to look at those options of how you can bring some alternative energy into this project. The planning that would go along with this project would involve the individual communities as a collection, but individuals, so that you're looking at your own city limits and what this impact does. We'd be looking at bridges and roads, and certainly those studies in Phase 3 will be led by the community. Those are not decisions. There's monies in that budget for this road and bridge reconstruction and development, and that's going to be driven by the communities to determine those outcomes. And certainly we've learned a lot of lessons from the existing reservoirs and Guy's Morse of things not to do. Those will be incorporated in best practices. Plus you'll see as we kind of move forward, we would envision using some best practices as well for water quality, which will be one of the bigger focuses of the Phase 3 study in the early days. In totality, I feel like that the project has a lot that it can offer, but there is a lot of consequences as well as a lot more information is required. And I think that from our standpoint, as we start to go down this road of Phase 3 is what we are calling it, we want to look at incremental steps that identify many of the issues that will be raised tonight, how that impacts the communities, and how those can be solved. And certainly the challenges before us are still great. There's no guarantee this project could ever be permitted or built. All of the issues related to funding and the construction, the permitting process, those are huge hurdles to clear, and I wouldn't want to misrepresent that to the community. But we believe we have a unique opportunity in relation to a regional water need that will be present. We compete regionally with cities sitting on large endless bodies of water, and our region sits on the White River. We have the ability to create about 11 billion gallons worth of storage, and we believe that that's the tool that can be used to move this project forward and to actually fund the project. And with that, I think I'm going to move into speaking with, have John LaTurner step up. My name is Rob Sparks. I'm working with the Mounds Lake project.
Madam President, who asked the question, where do you live, your address and whole bit?
I didn't do that.
My name is Patricia Johnson. I live in Carmel, Indiana. I represent the Indiana Garden Club.
We need your address, just not Carmel, Indiana.
Oh, I'm just asking a minute, please.
And what was the
They
question?
need to be
Did
asked
you-
from the podium because it is being recorded.
You have to, ma'am, just hang on, will you? What was your question, Councilman?
Who asked the question, and what was their address? In other words, the question came out.
If I may, all she asked was the name and address, which every speaker should state anyway. So for the interest of time.
And the mic wasn't working very well.
Correct. He actually said it at the beginning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now you do the same.
Okay. My name is John LaTurner. I work for DLZ. My address is 8103 Matthews Road, Indianapolis. I'm here with a group of our technical people to talk about where we've been with the project, where we would like to go in the next phase, and also to address as many of the questions as have been brought up in the forums as we can. Certainly we can't hit all of those, but to show that we've given thoughtful consideration to as many aspects of the project as we can to date. One thing I'd like to say and be very clear about is we are doing the project incrementally. In other words, the first phase of the project that was done a couple years ago was effectively a 1% level look at this project. And then we went into phase 2, and we'll call that 10%. The idea was not to go asking for $20 or $30 million to do a study that we get to the end of and say, you know, we could have stopped this at the 1 or 10% mark. So at this point, we're looking to go toward phase 3, and a lot of the items my technical folks will be talking about tonight will be covered in that. One of the very first things that I'd like to address is there's been a lot of question about need for water. And we have several studies that show indeed there is a need, and particularly, as Rob mentioned, this is a generational project. The example I would give is that most of the studies show that central Indiana's population will grow as much as 700,000 people by 2050. That is a need of an additional 60 or 70 million gallons of water that we currently do not have. Mounds Lake Reservoir, in its worst drought time, will produce 60 million gallons of water. And that was just a coincidence. Those numbers were very similar. But that's just based on a population growth. That's not to say that Anderson gets the next Honda plant, which is 6 million gallons of water by itself, or the next Nestle or the next whatever plant, Nucor Steel. So there is a need for water. We've got an international firm that did a study that said by 2020, any kind of drought that hits central Indiana is going to have a major shortfall of water, and our hydraulics engineer will talk about that a little bit later. But for this moment, Steve Metzer and I, he'll give his information here in a minute. He's our senior scientist, environmental scientist, and I will cover some of the environmental issues, and we will try to make these brief. We're not going to get down into the weeds of the technical part. But as I said, we'd like to address some of the issues that came up and talk about where we're going.
Steve Metzer, 1425 Keystone, Lansing, Michigan. As John mentioned, we're really looking to try to expand on what's been done thus far. The level of detail that has been explored for the social, environmental, and economic impacts of this proposed reservoir are really at a fairly low level of detail, and that's been done purposely to avoid jumping in and finding at the end that it really isn't feasible for a variety of reasons. The next phase of the project, which we're calling phase 3, would include a full analysis under the National Environmental Policy Act. For those of you who aren't familiar with the National Environmental Policy Act, you're probably more familiar with one of the types of analyses done under NEPA, which is an environmental impact statement, which is the most in-depth type of review that's required under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. The NEPA regulations and guidelines are very well spelled out. It requires extensive coordination with the resource agencies with jurisdiction for a variety of different resources, as well as extensive public outreach and input from anyone that is involved, from stakeholders to persons that are directly or indirectly impacted. Beginning with publication of a notice of intent to proceed into an environmental impact statement, the process is very well outlined, and I would suggest anyone that wants to become more familiar with exactly what the federal government guidelines are for an environmental impact statement can very easily go online and look under nepa.gov, and there's a very well thought out stepwise process that is out there that I will try to summarize here very, very briefly. As was previously mentioned, one of the most important parts of the environmental impact statement is determining the purpose and need for the project. Without a valid purpose for the project and demonstrating a need, the environmental impact statement process essentially ends right then and there. But the purpose and need is really what drives selection and evaluation of a variety of alternatives, including the do-nothing alternative. The EIS is required to evaluate all feasible options at a very low level and increase in detail as you start eliminating options that don't meet your purpose and need. So for instance, if we determine that there is a need for additional drinking water that would be provided by a reservoir or other way of providing that water, alternatives that don't meet that purpose of providing additional water supplies would essentially fall out, and we would slowly work our way through the details to a preferred alternative. The EIS is really done in several phases and steps. The first is a draft EIS, Leading up to the draft EIS, there is extensive coordination with all the resource agencies. We've already done some of that informally with the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the State Historic Preservation Officer, and various others, and we'll continue to do that, but it becomes much more formal. They don't form an opinion on anything until we publish that draft EIS, at which time there's a 45-day required public comment period. And in the DIS, we would evaluate everything from wetlands to archaeological impacts to historic sites, floodplains, flooding, social justice, economic impacts. Really, there's any number of types of things that are evaluated during the draft EIS phase. During the 45-day comment period, there is a public hearing or numerous public hearings. I would suspect on a project of this size, there will be multiple public hearings to allow everyone to have opportunity to either attend or provide their written comments. At the end of the DEIS phase, all those comments are evaluated. A preferred alternative is evaluated, and if additional studies are needed based on either comments from the agencies or input from the public, those additional studies are done. So this process, I think, as we've outlined, is easily 2.5, 3, maybe even more years in length from the start of the EIS process. So it's not something that we come in, start the process, we publish, and it's out the door. I mean, there's a lot of federal involvement. There's going to be a lot of interaction back and forth with both the public as well as feasibility for construction, the geology, all the different things that we have looked at a fairly low level of detail as described previously in the first 2 phases. One of the nicest things about the NEPA phase is that it is driven by the science and by a review of objective materials. There's no subjectivity. It does remove a lot of the emotion. I know this is a very emotional issue for people on both sides of the fence, and the NEPA process really looks to eliminate that and look strictly at factual information. Each agency reviews the resources that they are tasked with reviewing by the federal agency that they are involved with. Fish and Wildlife Service reviews certain things. The National Register of Historic Places is looking at different things. So there's a lot of different input that goes into this from the federal government, as well as input from the local government units of the county, state, counties, townships, and whatnot. The NEPA process is an open process. I know there's been concerns expressed about this being done behind closed doors, and that is not how NEPA is done. You can look online at anything that has been done through a NEPA process with the federal government. The NEPA process is going to be led by a lead federal agency, which at this point we believe to be the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and there will be many participating federal agencies, I would suspect, as well. It could be Fish and Wildlife, could be really any number of agencies that determine the impacts to be significant enough for them to be a co-sponsoring or a co-lead agency. So with that, I will be around to answer any questions that come up about the NEPA process or the additional studies that will be done as part of the phase 3 that would go into the NEPA phase.
Okay, I wanted to quickly cover some of the issues that we've heard regarding environmental. One of the first ones is that water quality in reservoirs can be a problem. Certainly, a large reservoir has not been built in Indiana for upwards of 40 years. There's a lot of things that have been learned within those 40 years, including how to put wetlands at the upper end of a reservoir, how to put, in our case, we're going to put in a low head dam that will catch silt. It will not become a mud flat. We will do contouring and so forth. So that will both take the nutrients out of the water and take a lot of the sedimentation out of the water. We will also be buying large buffer strips. One, because we have to have a flood pool available above the pool of the reservoir, and those buffer strips will function as filters as well. So that will help to keep sediment out. There's been a lot of question about farms and how the reservoir will affect those. Again, when we have to buy that additional height for flood pool, the farm ground that will be left will be 5 to 6 feet above the pool of the reservoir. So tiles will drain. It's just like taking water and pouring it into a swimming pool. The way the water comes out doesn't change no matter what the height of the swimming pool is. So the reservoir is the swimming pool, the tiles are the water, and gravity still works. So the water's going to come out of the tiles, it will flow into the reservoir regardless of the height of that. That's one of the things that the buffer helps with. Fair market value for residential structures. Certainly the federal process takes good care of that. We had a project not too long ago in Mishawaka where 50 of 51 homeowners took the very first offer that they were given because the federal guidelines lean toward favoring the homeowners. And the one person that didn't want more money for his barn than was on his property, they negotiated that and they were on their way. So that's a pretty good example of how that process works, that people are going to get fair market value for their homes. Mounds Park impacts. Yes, there will be the area down the bluff from the mounds clearly will be flooded. But there have been a lot of question about the mounds. Those are going to be 30 feet above the flood pool. So well up to the top of the bank and in 30 feet in vertical height, they're going to be fine up there. Another question that came up was smaller things that people are looking at, but they're very important to a lot of people, are the cemeteries in the area. The cemetery in Chesterfield has been asked about several times. That's 25 feet above the flood pool. And then there's an additional cemetery out north of the project on one of the county roads. It will be about 5 feet above the flood pool. So we've looked at a lot of those things. And the point of bringing these up is we weren't just looking at the big picture of, is there a water need and how much flood control can we do? We tried to do the little things like Rob talked about with the trails, what all can be done with the project. And again, I'll just say, we've done an incremental look, but we've touched on a lot of things, and we'd like to go to the next phase to address these bigger picture items where all the agencies get involved, and we move forward from there. With that, I've got two guys to talk about the geotechnical aspects of the project, and so I'll let it go to them.
Thank you. I'm Tim Hampshire. I head up the Geotechnical Engineering Group at DLZ. Geotechnical Engineering Group is basically the water resources group. We deal with the engineering aspects of dams and levees and other water resources structures. I'm sorry. 6121 Huntley Road, Columbus, Ohio. And my colleague and I just want to spend a couple minutes to discuss some of the soil, the geological, the geotechnical aspects of the site. With respect to the actual dam site itself, where the actual dam will be constructed, the topography there, as well as the subsurface conditions, are pretty favorable for the construction of this type of dam. There's been a few soil borings that have been done based on historical information that we've reviewed. The site for the actual dam is mostly very dense sands and gravels, very, very hard clays over pretty good limestone bedrock. So as far as the actual construction of the dam itself, there really right now aren't identified any significant obstacles. The dam is currently being envisioned as an earthen embankment dam, which is a soil dam with a concrete spillway. Due to the conditions of the soil at the site, any settlement that would occur during the construction should be relatively minimal. There may be the need for what's called a cutoff wall beneath the dam, which is basically a concrete or a steel wall that goes into the ground to prevent any water seepage underneath. But again, that's very, very common construction for dams of this nature. So at that point, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague who will get into more of a little bit of the geological aspects of the site.
My name is Brian Mott, and I'm with DLZ. I'm a geologist for them.
Need your address.
Yes, I'm working on it. My address is 6121 Huntley Road, Columbus, Ohio.
Thank you.
We've taken a broad brush look right now at this point at looking at the geology across the region, which includes both soils as well as the bedrock underlying that. And what we have is basically glacial tills, with the exception of the valley itself, surrounding most of the area. The valley itself contains outwash, which Tim touched on previously, which is sands and gravels. These are all well consolidated, pretty dense material, very suitable for building on for many things. Outside of that, we've got, as I mentioned, the glacial materials, which tend to be more clayey, resistant to flow. There are intermixed within that sand seams and other things along that do supply some of the water wells in the area. Deeper down, underneath the soil, we have basically limestones and dolomites of various ages, and on into the Ordovician age below that. Those, it's been some concern that there has been some karstic features that have been developed in this. Near the surface, we haven't found any in the limited boring program that we've done so far, but we're looking forward to getting deeper into it and seeing if we can identify these through either additional borings or other geophysical methods. So, as again, we've done very light work on this, and we really need to take a deeper look at it to see where we're at.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to address one other thing that's sort of a geotechnical type issue. There's been a lot of question about erosion that could happen due to the presence of boats and so forth on the lake. I have made a couple of trips to the other major reservoirs around the state, and there is maybe 1% erosion of any significance on those. You go to Brookville Lake, and it has a lot of the tree line that would be, say, around Mounds Park. There is no erosion, and I just don't believe that is going to be a problem. And certainly we can address if there is an area that it could be suspect to erosion. The next thing we're going to talk about is the hydrology real briefly. I touched on it earlier talking about the need for water. One other thing that this project has the ability to do based on some unique features of the area is both Morse and Geist Reservoir can be refilled off of this lake. The lake has twice as much drainage area into it, and due to proximity of some tributaries and so forth to those two lakes, as we're talking about the future, and again, this is a generational thing for your kids and your grandkids that are going to need the water, keeping all three of those reservoirs full at one time as we head into, say, a drought like we had in 2012, which was pretty mild, or a bigger drought that we had in 1988, you're going to get that much more of the resource kept alive as you're heading into that drought season. So that's an important factor. And I'd also like to say there's a lot of talk out there about that dams are an archaic thing. And I followed a couple things just as an examples here. Since this project started, there was a dam being constructed right by my sister's house in Denver. About 3 times the size of this in height, slightly longer, not as much land acquisition. It came in for a little over $200 million. So we believe we have a safe buffer in our cost. A lot of people have said, no, it's $600 million or $800 million. We think we've already got that covered. And then further, the need for dams with aquifers being lowered and so forth is out there. Just an example that these are going on, and I realize every state is different. But the state of Texas right now has 25 new reservoirs on their books, of which they've guaranteed that 13 of those will be built. So this is not a stray project that we're looking at out of the blue. It's happening all over the country. And as we hit this population boom in the next generation, we're going to need water. And the study said, because we don't have a major body of water in central Indiana, there may be several items we need to do. So this reservoir might get us through another 2 generations or 3, and then we got to add another piece onto that. So you got Eagle Creek, Morse, Geist, surface water off the rivers, groundwater, mounds, and whatever the next step is. But that'll be somebody's addressing the same issue in 2050 when they're starting to approach being out of water again. Dr. Cherian is going to talk real briefly about how much water we're doing and what the drought has to do with that.
My name is MP Cherian, and I'm 6121 Huntley Road, Columbus, Ohio. I'm responsible for the hydrology and hydraulics aspects of this project. So we looked at a lot of the stream flow data down White River, just downstream of the dam. We got data from 1927 onwards. It's a large data record. So we looked at that entire stream record and tried to determine what kind of flow could this reservoir provide in terms of volume. The volume behind the dam is roughly about 11 billion gallons. And in looking at the entire record, the worst drought you had was during 1940 to 1942, followed by the Dust Bowl years, which was the 1930s. And then the recent drought was 1988. So with this kind of storage behind the dam, when we released that entire record of flow, what we found was we could, even during the worst case, which is 1940 to 1942, we could supply as much as 60 million gallons per day. The actual low flow in the river, if you did not have the dam, the flow would be roughly about 5 million gallons per day. So you're talking about a big increase as a result of the storage. And actually what happens is when you have a storage of that sort during a normal year, within about 1 month during the spring, which is you're talking about February, March, April, during 1 month, the reservoir will fill up. So you got that extra storage you can release during a drought period. During a real drought period, it might take maybe 2 months to fill up, but you still have that water you can release. And that's the reason why you have some kind of a safety to fight the drought when you have that kind of storage. The other thing I wanted to say is that with this kind of storage and the storage you have at Morse, Geist, and Eagle Creek, you could do some amount of balancing, so you could actually utilize all of the reservoirs together in a very optimal manner, so that you can keep the levels as high as possible and yet meet the drought needs. And that's the intent of the balancing.
Thank you.
We'll turn it back to Rob.
Without a doubt, this gets pretty technical fairly quick, and certainly our folks will be around later tonight or following this presentation if you want to ask questions, or if other questions are raised, they'll be available to filter those questions for you.
Please stick around.
So,
can you folks in the back here, are you hearing?
We'll be, yeah, and I'm a little hoarse too, that doesn't help, so I will try to focus. To conclude, I've got Greg Winkler is going to address the council for a couple minutes here, or a few minutes.
Good evening, Council President, members of the City Council. I'm Greg Winkler. I serve you as the Economic Development Director. My address for the record is 12478 Hawks Landing in Fishers, Indiana. I would offer for your consideration tonight that what you're looking at is an opportunity to continue the study and evaluation of this process. And I would ask that you keep that in mind. As we look at economic development opportunities for the city, as we look at quality of life opportunities for the city, I can't think of a single opportunity like this that we could bring to you that would create the kind of change and progress and opportunity for the people of Anderson that this project will create. We'll be bringing a couple of very large economic development opportunities to you over the coming months, but they pale in consideration to this opportunity. So we'll just ask for you to keep in mind that what you're considering is moving forward to evaluate and study. As the gentleman from DLZ have pointed out, an EIS, Environmental Impact Statement, is a long process. It's intensive. It will be there to answer questions throughout the community and the surrounding area, and that process will take several years to complete. So I would urge you to move forward with the evaluation process tonight with a vote to start and form the commission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kyle Morey, CEO of the Madison County Chamber of Commerce. Happy to be here. I live at 9191 West Swimming Hole Lane, Pendleton, Indiana. I have a few comments and remarks that we've prepared on behalf of our board, organization that represents over 500 companies and businesses, employers, and employees in this area. Just some thoughts to consider. It hasn't been that long ago. The 3 o'clock whistle would sound and half of Anderson would empty into the streets. Some were in cars, other on foot, and all headed home, unless it was Friday night. And we all got in our cars and we had some fun. We cashed our checks, paid our bills, and maybe grabbed a burger at one of the drive-ups like McDonald's or Burger Chef. It hasn't been that long ago. Then GM announced they were moving out, closing down, leaving Madison County. Some buildings were abandoned, others were bulldozed. Our population began to tumble, our children moved away, and even longtime citizens found it easier to take up residence outside our community. Then came the headlines and the jokes, and a community identity crisis, as we described and others described ourselves as a suburb of Indianapolis, a bedroom community, and finally a city in decay. It hasn't been that long ago. Then came a headline a year ago that declared plans for a lake, a reservoir, and suddenly our papers, websites, and social media were filled with maps and overlays as we all squinted to see just how close this lake would be to our houses, our schools, our churches, our businesses, our streets. The chatter started as the studies mounted up. Displays were placed around the community, and one by one, we all were invited to investigate just how close, indeed, Mounds Lake would come to our lives. Today, sides are still being formed and have been formed, some for and some for against. Lines are being drawn in the sand, and enthusiastic discussion is taking place on both sides of the question as each of us asks our neighbor, so what do you think? Since the very beginning, the Madison County Chamber has been behind the Mounds Lake project. And since the very beginning, the Chamber has asked for civility in this discussion. We represent members in all regions that are impacted by this lake. And we hear loud and clear their enthusiasm and their support for this project. So we're at a crossroads. Do we continue? Do we stop? Are we harming the environment? Will businesses be enhanced or interrupted? Will communities be transformed or destroyed? Will landowners lose in the deal? Now is the time, I think, for each of us to step up and be leaders. Let's listen to our friends who are worried about the environment. Let's be concerned for our businesses and homes that might be displaced. Let's continue to dialogue and think carefully about the impact while dreaming of what we want our future to be. But conversely, let's dream with those who see Anderson and Madison County as it could be. Let's think about new infrastructures and new businesses popping up in Chesterfield, Delville, Anderson, and beyond. Let's consider the benefits that may be derived for our children and our grandchildren in years to come. And let's consider the positive impact on our economy, our tourism, and of course our need for water. On behalf of the Madison County Chamber, I strongly recommend that our City Council consider going forward and form the commission that would lead us into Phase 3. We feel a great sense of encouragement in our community. And it's courageously grasped this issue and discussed it well and thoroughly, but there must be more to do, more questions to be asked, and more answers to seek. Thus, the need for a commission. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Don Henderson, retired president of the town council in Pendleton. And when I first heard of this project...
We need your address, sir.
I'm sorry, Donna, I appreciate it. I'm sorry. It's 211 West Street in Pendleton. For the last 25 years, ladies and gentlemen, I've lived in a historic town. And it's been rather dynamic. And there's been a lot of things that have happened there that have been all positive. But, you know, the interesting thing was, prior to that, I lived in a prison town. And the interesting thing is, it's the same town. And nothing was happening. And I was on the Planning Commission, and we tried to get business and industry to come into our town. We tried to get young people to move into our town. We tried a lot of things, and nothing happened. And then we had some very courageous ladies that put us on the National Historic Register. And that happened in 1991, and suddenly, all of a sudden, people, when they ask me where I live, rather than snickering and saying, oh, that's a prison town, isn't it? Now say, oh, Don, that's a wonderful community. My friends go there, we have family that lives there, and I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, we've had young people move into our community in the last 25 years that would never have happened before. Why I'm so excited about this project is because I see, and I lived in this community all my life. I spent a part of my young life, my growing up years, over on West 25th Street. I went to Roosevelt School. And I saw Anderson develop and become an icon through GM. Now, we've lost GM. And then I've heard people say, well, this is the new normal. I want to say to you, only if you want it to be. We have an opportunity here, I believe, to really transform our area and our community. And we have it in a once, probably in a lifetime opportunity. And I hope that we grasp it. This project is not going to be for you and I, particularly me. I'm an old man. I won't tell you how old I am, but I'm practicing to be 83. And I want you to know that this project is for our children and grandchildren. I do believe we have an endangered species, and it is our children and grandchildren. Look around. Look at the number of young people that are moving into Anderson to get jobs and live here and want to stay here. I'm sorry that is not the case right now, but it could be, and it should be. I can tell you we've had that happen in Pendleton. If I want to see young people, I go there. I go to Noblesville. I go to Fishers. You know, I've heard how bad these reservoirs possibly are, and it almost makes me want to feel sorry for the people in Fishers because they have Geist. And I feel sort of bad for those people in Noblesville that have put up with Morse. And all the bad things that have happened from that. I'm sorry, but there are hurdles, yes. And there are things to overcome that can be, if we put our minds and our efforts and our energies to it. We can do some really great environmental things with a project like this. When was the last time we heard of $450 million coming back into our community for anything? And I think it's time we take a step, and I encourage you to take that step to at least incrementally move forward. This isn't a catch-all, hey, it's a done deal, not by any stretch of the imagination. It's just one more step, and there's several steps to be taken before we're even determined whether it is really feasible. But we think up to this point that it is. And I certainly encourage you, we'll be around, we'll be here, our experts will be here. These people are outstanding in their field and building projects of this type. DLZ has done this over the country. And I want to say to you that what has been done up to this point, Rob Sparks, in my judgment, has done an outstanding job. He has brought an opportunity to this community to look at that I haven't seen anyone else bring here before, and I want to commend him for his efforts. Thank you.
Does that conclude
I think
your...
with that,